Throughout history, art has been used to political ends. While it's been used by governments trying to maintain order by strengthening legitimacy, it has also been used by revolutionaries and movements trying to change the status quo. Art was perhaps never more political than in the 20th century. Through an analysis of pieces from three art movements, Dada, Socialist Realism, and Dissident art in Brazil, this video will show the ways in which political reality affected art, and art affected political reality. From 1914 to 1918, the Great War ravaged Europe. The romanticization of war embodied in paintings before the Great War became revealed as one of its causes. Dadaism emerged in 1916 in Zurich and quickly spread to major cities in the West, and it rejected the traditional styles and values seen in pre-war art. Because pre-war art was all most people knew, many called Dada anti-art, including Dadaists themselves. Dadaism wasn't just a rejection of all authority, it was a rejection of everything, including Dada. To quote a Dada manifesto, "Dada is life, Dada is that which changes, Dada is nothing, 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 everything is Dada." Some Dadaist works were overtly political. This work, called Murdering Airplane, reminds us that humans were to blame in the end for the industrialized warfare of the Great War, not machines. It reminds us that there was someone in a lab who designed a grenade to be as deadly as possible. While many Dadaist artists were against industrialization in this way, others were fascinated with machines in the modern world, such as Francis Picabia, who composed many machine-like artworks, including this one of a camera and this one of an alarm clock. A French artist named Marcel Duchamp appropriated objects and displayed them with little to no modification. He called these ready-mades. One of these is called Bottle Rack. Another is called Prelude to a Broken Arm. My favorite, though, is a urinal titled Fountain. Galleries refused to show it. The Society of Independent Artists criticized it. The fountain may be a very useful object in its place, but its place is not in an art exhibition, and it is, by no definition, a work of art. Thus, the Dada movement opened up the question, what is art and what is its purpose? While the purpose of Dada art became increasingly aimless in the West, it had been channeled for the purpose of the revolution in Soviet Russia. Dadaist influence is apparent in many early Soviet propaganda posters. This poster uses a Dada-style aesthetic to encourage workers to learn how to read. In this way, the Dada movement, which had at first been anti-everything, had now been co-opted for the cause of the revolution. But this Dadaist influence on Russian art would not last, because Stalin would soon replace it with the new official art form of the Soviet Union. In contrast to the earlier art of the Soviet Union, which was bold and revolutionary, Socialist Realism referenced more traditional styles and values. In 1934, Stalin made Socialist Realism the only allowed form of art in the Soviet Union. This strengthened the role of censorship and was part of the reactionary phase of the Russian Revolution. Socialist Realism represents a continuity with art put forward by earlier authoritarian governments. We can see this continuity by comparing Queen Elizabeth's Armada portrait with the painting Stalin and Vorshilov in the Kremlin. Both paintings put an emphasis on the military. The Armada portrait is themed around a British military success, while Stalin and his general are wearing military uniforms. The paintings also both put the leaders in the focal points. Stalin cuts across the diagonal lines of the painting, creating an island of stability, while Queen Elizabeth dominates the frame. Symbols in the paintings are meant to further increase the ruler's legitimacy. While the globe and crown in the Armada portrait represent the naval dominance of the monarchy, The proletariat in the city represents Stalin's connection to the people, and the smokestacks represent his economic achievements. This painting, along with numerous similar paintings that were everywhere in Russia, helped to create Stalin's cult of personality and strengthen his political power. While Stalin is taller than Voroshilov in the painting, he was in reality considerably shorter. This gets me to my second theme for socialist realism, the distortion of reality. The Soviet Union, a totalitarian regime, did not just seek to control its inhabitants' actions, it sought to control the truth. The name socialist realism embodies this. It was not socialist idealism or socialist futurism. It was the imposed reality which everyone had to pretend was true. While the real Soviet Union had suffered from a terrible famine in the early 1930s and imposed the Holodomor in Ukraine, Stalin's Soviet Union was prosperous and hopeful. In Stalin's Soviet Union, there was no wrongdoing because those who went against the government had never existed. In Stalin's Soviet Union, peasants were well dressed and had plenty of extra food to eat and wine to drink. One even had a bicycle. To real peasants that had gone through the horrors of the Holodomor, this would have been a tremendous insult. But socialist realism was not for the people that it depicted. Peasants were too hungry to care about art. The paintings were an export to urban party officials and to other nations, just like the grain that had been stolen from them in the years before. While I've shown radical art and government-instituted art in this video, I haven't yet shown dissident art, so I'll take a little time to do that. In 1964, Brazil had a military coup, which replaced a left-leaning president with a series of military-backed dictators. 1968 to 1975 were the most repressive years of the dictatorship, which committed numerous human rights abuses and cracked down on freedom of speech. Those who criticized the regime took great risks, often putting their lives on the line. It was unclear what was allowed and what was not allowed in Brazil, and the government would strike arbitrarily and without warning. Artists adapted to this by adopting more temporary forms of art in order to avoid detection, in contrast to permanent works like sculptures and paintings. One example of a more temporary form of art is Soy Loco por Ti, America, by Antonio Manuel, made of wood, cloth, plastic, and rope, which deals with the shared South American experience of living under repressive governments. Government critics saw the red color as advocating for communism, but the image spoke to people and spread. The Brazilian bank that bought the artwork found that it had started to decompose after 2 months, and contacted the artist, who responded that the smell was, quote, South America itself exhaling its own smell of decomposition. Like Dada, Brazilian dissident art never reached much of the mainstream, and most Brazilians were largely unaware of it. But there are also differences between the two. While Dada is anti-everything, dissident art in Brazil is solely anti-government. These differences originate in the fact that Brazil had an authoritarian government, and Dadaism was largely in democracies. Authoritarian governments forced artists to make the decision of whether they were going to align with the ideology of the state, like in socialist realism, or to dissent, like in Brazil. While all three movements produce powerful art, they are each fundamentally different in terms of their origins, purposes, and effects, and give deeper insight into different moments of the 20th century.